Hello and welcome to Spinster's Library. I'm Claudia and today I want to discuss the question, are classics really better than contemporary literature? This video was inspired by two things that happened recently. One of them was Bill discovering the Vibing Cat Meme Twitter account, which is a Twitter account that only posts variations on the Vibing Cat meme. I will link that Twitter account in the description box if you want to check that out, but it's pretty much exactly what I've said. You get cat vibing to Queen, cat vibing to Aqua, cat vibing to Eminem. You get the idea. The second thing that inspired this video was a comment that I got on a previous video of mine. That previous video was a bit of a rant in which I complained about people telling me that I'm reading the classics wrong. Excellent video, by the way, if I may say so myself, and that will be linked in the description box as well. The comment I got on that video read as follows. Pretty much everything in life evolves and becomes better over time. Athletes, sports, music, movies, and yes, books. I personally hate the snobby classic elitist people of any community because they can never be objective or allow others to have their opinions. I personally dislike most classics of any medium because they are simply lower quality than most things we have today. And I know a lot of people feel that way too, but can't say it because people will just call them naive or call this generation inferior when it probably is the opposite. First of all, I'm not having a go at the person who wrote this comment. I think if they say classics of any medium are lower quality, then that is clearly just their own opinion. And as that, it is totally fine. I also get the point of view of feeling belittled by elitists who take the opposite view to this person who think that the classics are inherently better than contemporary art. However, I do take issue with the idea that objectively everything gets better over time. Many things get objectively better over time. Things like our life expectancy, our standard of living, computer screens, they objectively got better over time. I think that that can be applied to many things, but one thing that it can't be applied to is art. And by art I mean literature, music, yes, movies. What else is there other than literature, movies, and music? Oh, like visual art, you know, painting and photography or whatever. I don't think you can say that everything evolved for the better. So that comment inspired me to think about the evolution of art and the evolution of taste. So here's a controversial statement coming up, right? Controversial statement coming up, make sure you get your dislike button ready. I find the Vibing Cat meme so much more hilarious than the majority of Monty Python sketches that I have seen. Let me repeat that. I find the Vibing Cat meme funnier than most of Monty Python. So most people would argue that Monty Python is objectively funnier than Vibing Cat. But is this actually true? Of course not, because there is no such thing as objectively funnier. What's funny and what isn't? Our human sense of humor is 100% subjective. There is no such thing as something being objectively funnier than something else, because the concept of funny is an entirely subjective concept. It's an entirely personal thing. So you could argue that Monty Python is more complex, more thought out, more abstract, maybe more groundbreaking than the Vibing Cat meme, and all of those things would be true. But that has nothing to do with how funny I find Monty Python sketches as opposed to Vibing Cat meme. And I'm using the experience of humor, of laughing at something, as a stand-in. When I say that something is a subjective experience, that doesn't mean that that experience exists in a vacuum. Our sense of humor, my sense of humor, and your sense of humor will be shaped by the cultural surroundings that you grew up in and that you are living in right now. My sense of humor is shaped by the time and culture in which I grew up. And the same is true for everyone. The same is true for Monty Python. The same is true going further back in time. It's true for the humor in Jane Austen's novels or the humor in William Shakespeare's plays. I can look back at some of Shakespeare's one-liners or some of Shakespeare's puns and kind of go, huh, yeah, I get it. I get it. Very clever. But I'm not going to be laughing as much about that as I do about a cat bobbing its head to music. There is a disconnect between the mental understanding of what a joke is and the actual emotional reaction to it. Now, I'm using humor as one example, but the same can be true about different emotions that our consuming of art evokes in us. If I read a book that is very sad, someone else might read that and not find that sad. If I read a book from the 18th century that has a tragedy in it, it might evoke a very different emotional response in me than it did in readers of the 18th century. These kind of responses that we have to art and literature are personal, subjective, and shaped by the time and place in which we live. And so we get to the topic of taste. What is taste? My taste in music is likely very different to yours, and my taste in literature is likely very different to yours. And yet there are trends throughout time. If you listen to a toccata by J.S. Bach, it sounds very different to Breaking the Habit by Linkin Park. These two pieces of music are separated by centuries, and they are separated by different musical conventions. And you don't need to be a musicologist to pick up on that. You can hear the two pieces of music and you will be instantly able to tell that they are different, even though you might not have the technical vocabulary to express exactly in which ways these pieces are different. But is one of them better than the other? The person who wrote the comment I read out to you earlier would argue that purely because of the amount of time that has passed between these two pieces of music being composed, the latter is inherently better than the former. However, I could fill up this entire apartment with musicologists who will say that music died in 1750 with the death of J.S. Bach and has never recovered since. And those are equally silly assumptions and opinions to have. Because just like with humor, there is no such thing as objectively good music. And I say that as a musicologist. Of course I can point at a piece by J.S. Bach and look at all the complexities and look at the way that it is composed, and I could point at a piece by a contemporary even of J.S. Bach. We don't even have to leave the lifespan of J.S. Bach. I could point at many pieces of music that were composed at the same time that are not as complex, not as well thought out, not as groundbreaking. But if someone stands next to me and tells me that they prefer the piece by this anonymous, slightly more shit version of J.S. Bach to the piece by J.S. Bach, then who am I to tell them that they're wrong? Taste, just like a sense of humor, is subjective and personal, but it is shaped by our surrounding and by our culture and by the shifts that happen within any art form over time. And these shifts, they are not linear, they don't follow one after the other in a straight line. They are more like a mishmash of different strands all interweaving and splitting off, and then some of them ending and some of them popping up. In school you learn that music progressed from Renaissance, because clearly there was nothing around before that. Oh no, sorry. You start with Gregorian chants, then there's the Renaissance music, then there's the Baroque music, then there's the classical period, etc. And it just doesn't work like that. Different developments spring up all of the time, and some of them become popular and some of them don't. Modern music today, and I say that as someone who hasn't listened to a new song since 2015, modern music today has very little to do, for example, with 12-tone. 12-tone and modern music are on completely different planets of taste and of musical execution. So modern music today is much closer to the music of J.S. Bach than it is to the music of Schoenberg, even though if we were to follow the logic of that comment I showed you earlier, they would be in a straight progression getting better with every single year and with every single development. I've talked way too much about music in a video that is ostensibly about books, so let's get back to literature. Literature functions the same way. It's not that Jane Austen was less sophisticated than an author today. I cannot think of a name of an author today. Let's take Sarah Waters, a 21st century author that I have heard of and read and quite liked. So if you take an author from the 21st century, Sarah Waters, you take an author from the 20th century like Daphne du Maurier, you take an author from the 19th century like Jane Austen, this isn't a line that gets progressively better because of new innovation in literature, of new thoughts or new aspects that are invented and developed. Literature and our tastes shift and change. We only know of Jane Austen because someone in her time read those books and then wrote about them and kept those books and preserved them for our generation. And the same is true for 20th century authors. Someone published those books, someone picked those books up, someone bought them, someone stored them, someone put them in a library. That is how art is preserved through the centuries. But there were plenty of Jane Austen's contemporaries that we don't know about today. There are plenty of Jane Austen's contemporaries whose works are sitting in a library unread. Now I want to show you the conversation I actually had with the person who made that comment. First I'll show you my response, which was pretty much just a shorter version of what I've said in this video so far. So I said, I profoundly disagree that everything becomes better over time. I love classic literature and classical music. I don't think that art, music, literature changes for the better or for the worse. It just changes and our tastes change with it. It doesn't get better, it doesn't get worse. And then they replied, you're right about the art aspect behind music and literature for sure. I over-exaggerated with the everything, but the quality of things as a whole do get better over time because everyone today has access to the great works of the past and improve upon them slowly over time. And the quantity also increases drastically, so more great things are being made or done more often. I guess there's much more ambiguity with literature than objective things like sports, athletics, films, tech. I'm going to ignore the last sentence about sports, athletics, films and tech being objective because that will be a whole other video. But going back to the earlier part of this response, this person has some good points. They make the point that because access is wider to art and literature, there is more potential in humanity. If I lived in the 13th century, I likely wouldn't be able to read or write. Therefore, no matter how much of a storytelling genius I naturally possess, I wouldn't be able to express that because I wouldn't have the access to the knowledge to make these great works of art. And we don't even have to go back to the 13th century for that. Look at, for example, Jane Austen. She was well educated in her home. She had access to literature of her past and her contemporary times, and she had the leisure to sit down and write novels. Many of her contemporaries did not have that chance, did not have that access, did not have that education. Someone in the 21st century who's an author, they don't just have access to the literature of Jane Austen and her contemporaries. They also have access to all of the literature that came since then. They have access to social media, they have access to books and universities and online content. That gives them a much richer pool of knowledge to take from and develop their own ideas. But just because there is mathematically a higher chance of good art being made today than it was in the 18th and 19th century, that doesn't mean that good art wasn't being made in the 18th and 19th century. And we all come back to the point of subjectivity. One of the biggest things that frustrates me about running a channel in which I talk about books is the comments that I get where people assume that I'm speaking for everyone. I'm not, I'm only speaking for myself. And where people assume that their opinion is objective. And this is a human flaw. We all think we're right. But the recognition that our own subjective experience is both personal and shaped by culture helps a lot with understanding how different trends happen and how different tastes develop and how different movements happen within art. And that is why I find the vibing cat meme absolutely hilarious. But when I look at a Monty Python sketch, I'm like, okay, whatever. What was the point of this video? Are the classics really better than contemporary fiction? No, they are not. Is contemporary fiction really better than the classics? No. Why? Because the concept of better is an entirely subjective experience shaped by our own personal experience and the time and culture in which we grew up. I am so looking forward to the comment section of this. Thank you for watching. Bye!